the models I used quantitative survey, SurveyMonkey, etc., and qualitative interviews. The modes I was testing for government departments were, firstly, the 4 modes of public relations as identified by James Grunig in 1984 when he did his landmark study there. And the 4 modes that he identified, and I will have to go to my slides to get all the detail of this. Basically, 4 modes. Firstly is one-way asymmetric communication, which is essentially propaganda, where you just pump out material which doesn't have to be true, in fact, it's often lies. Just to persuade people of your point of view. The second...
There were 3 people in the auditorium.
The second... No, I'm going to carry on. The second mode is one-way public information, which is like the propaganda mode, but truthful. And it is largely the old sort of 1950s public information films. It is one-way communication from a dominant force to a public saying this is what you need to do. But it is always factual and honest in that sense. The third mode is two-way communication, but asymmetric. Two-way asymmetric communication, which is where you are engaging with your audience, but actually you're still just trying to persuade them. Ultimately, you don't care what they think, and you only use their feedback to make your propaganda more effective. That's how you use their feedback and their evaluation. And then the fourth mode is the two-way symmetric, where it is two-way communication with your audience, but you actually care about what they think, and what they say and do can influence what you say and do. You can actually move your position as a result. So I tested government departments to see, are you using it in which of these 4 modes? Didn't ask them that out, because I know what they'd all say. They'd all say what James Grunig's research showed, which was that the best organisations are the ones that are using it in the two-way symmetric mode, that final mode. That's the one associated with excellence in an organisation. If you just ask people straight out how do you use that, they'd all say the fourth one. So that's not what you do. The second model that I tested them against was something called the Barcelona Principles. The Barcelona Principles are a set of principles designed collectively by a group of PR academics in Barcelona. So it's called Barcelona Principles in, I think it was 2009 or 2010. Very recently, very new stuff. And it's about evaluating PR. And those 7 principles, I'll have to log into actually the computer to actually recite them to you. Yeah, the seven principles are: goal setting and measurement are important. 1. 2, measuring effect on outcomes is better than measuring the effect on outputs. 3 is that you should measure the effect on business results. 4 is you need quality and quantity to measure PR effectively. 5 was that advertising value equivalence and opportunities to see and those kind of numerical cash measures are not good measures of PR. They might be good measures of marketing or advertising, but they're not good measures of PR. 6, social media should be measured. That's an interesting one. And 7, that transparency and replicability are important to sound measurement. In other words, if you never publish your evaluation, then it probably isn't a good evaluation. You'd be amazed at, if you ever read something like PR Week, you read about all these successful PR campaigns. You never read about the PR campaigns that failed.
Yeah,
they do fail.
It'd be good to learn why.
Yeah, they do fail, but those ones that they don't feel the need to go to PR Week and be interviewed and do an article about it. Funnily enough.
A bit rubbish.
Yeah, funnily enough.
Yeah.
Because PR is an industry where success is kind of part of what you do, and if you can't show it, then you don't talk about it. But actually, at Barcelona, they said, actually, no, we need to change this. You need to talk about failures and things.
Same problem with drug testing, of course. So the companies weren't publishing all the results of drugs that didn't work, and they're having to change the law on that because it was affecting profoundly people's impression of what didn't work.
I think that's right. So I tested them against each of those 7 principles, and are you following them? Please do come in. More. So how I did it was I structured some interviews around that with these 8 heads of digital engagement. I did a survey. What the survey did was it actually took a load of statements that either supported either positive evidence or negative evidence for exhibiting those behaviours that I've just talked about, those modes and those principles, and got people in the survey just does your organisation do this? From strongly disagree to strongly agree. Mixture of positive and negative statements there, because some showing yes we do this, and some which if they agreed with it meant that they're clearly not exhibiting the behaviour. The reason you have to do that is because if people like us, people in this room, if you tend to ask them, do you do this? They say yes. Do you do this? They say yes. Do you do this? They say yes, because no one likes to admit that there's something that they don't do. So you can't just ask them, do you do this? Because they'll all say yes. You have to answer a mixture of that support the hypothesis and a mixture of questions that would actually take away from the hypothesis. Then you subtract the positive from the negative from the positive answers at the end. So what did I get? Well, on the Grunegian modes, as they are sometimes called, inelegantly, I found that the most common way in which government departments use social media is in the public information mode. Now, in many ways, that's not a surprise for government. That's where government communication comes from at the sort of dawn of the 20th century, was in that very much public information. It all starts with things like taxes and immunisation and stuff like that at the start of the 20th century. So in many ways not a surprise, but as the rest of the PR literature tells us, this is not actually the best way to do public relations. The second most popular mode was sadly the first one, the press agentry or publicist, the propaganda mode. That was the second most common way to use it. The third most popular was the two-way asymmetric, where you put out messages, you do listen to your audience, but you actually just use what your audience feedback do to make your messages more effectively. You don't really listen to your audience. And the least popular was the two-way symmetric. So this is kind of bad news. But it wasn't terrible news because they did all show some behaviours in the two-way symmetric. They were doing it. And in fact, all four modes are going on at the same time in government and in each government department. It's just that not all to quite the same extent. That's what I found. On the, it's worth saying that around the qualitative stuff on that, asking about the public information mode, which is the one they use the most. And these, I've got two quotes here. One quote is, "We tended to be factual and flat in what we say." And the head of digital engagement said that, and another head of digital engagement said, "It's 60% about creating and sharing content and about 40% about team engagement." So actually, we're largely on transmit, is what he or she was saying there. I have anonymised these figures because each government department generally only has one head of digital engagement. So if you mention what the subject matter was, you've identified what the image was. They did say that the aim of their communications was not really to persuade, it was to inform. But often persuasion was what you ended up doing because you'd probably be informing people about their choices in that kind of way, which can be persuasive. Interesting thing that people said under that public information heading is that they felt that digital and social media had required a higher standard of truth than press relations in government. That they always felt the press office could get away with stuff over the phone that they couldn't get away with in social media because of the level of scrutiny by the number of people that would be done. So often they felt social media was kind of the honest partner to press relations sometimes. Admittedly, they would think that, I suppose, because they are in that world, but that was an interesting conclusion. I don't know if anyone agrees or disagrees with that. It was an interesting point. I did notice, actually, there was a few people mentioned this tension between the digital and social teams and the press teams over who owned the message at times, particularly when things were fast-moving. That did that.
Truth or transparency, would you say? Because they're connected, but
yeah, probably both, I guess.
So the nice thing is to just like do it all together. Like I used to be head of press and then head of comm strategy, and now I'm head of digital, which is really handy because like you kind of people sort of look at you and don't know what you do really, and also you can get away with murder on Facebook because no one actually realise it really looks at it, which is really, really, really helpful. Soon they will, but that under the radar is a really big opportunity at the moment.
On the two-way symmetric mode, which is the best quote mode, but they used the least, someone said, quote was, "It would be wrong to say we have fully functioning two-way engagement." They kind of admitted that they don't do that. But they did, most of them did have an example of where the organisation had shifted its position on an issue because of what the public had said on social media. But often those examples, and you would think that was positive, but often those examples were where the government had shifted its position not from a position of strength, but from where it had been bullied basically by the mass, and they'd had to change their position. So it wasn't something they'd necessarily sought to drive, it had happened to them rather than them making it happen. And there were a few examples of that. What was interesting was that they felt, as digital communicators, that the culture, conventions and the wider political factors of the role they had meant that actually genuine two-way engagement was probably impossible. As government, we're probably always trying to get people to do something, think something, believe something. You know, that's what politicians want, and that engagement is expressed back to them ultimately through the ballot box, not through social media. And there are some really interesting questions there about accountability, I felt. You could argue, if I can get what I want by campaigning for it on Facebook, why would I ever bother to vote for a political party? I don't need to. I can get government to do what I want anyway. So I think there's some interesting things there, and they did feel that the culture and conventions that you couldn't necessarily get that engagement anyway.
I think one of the challenges as well is the issue of the neutrality of government and the civil service,
Yeah.
because to be authentic, you kind of, on a political issue, you've got to be political. So there's a tension between where the resources are, because they're not necessarily lying with government and they're not necessarily lying with politicians, they're lying somewhere in between, and there is no resource to handle that in between bit.
I think some of them also felt that. They weren't quite sure how much expectation the public actually had of being able to change government policy through social media. And they felt in some areas they might do because they're very engaged, but by and large they don't. I think the interesting question is whether that will change and whether we're ready for it. I don't know. So that was on the kind of modes of communication. On evaluation, the results came back that on the versus the Barcelona principles, the importance of goal setting, 1, the measuring effect on the business results, 1, and the transparency and replicability, 1, they scored pretty high actually. People were following those. But on measuring outcomes over in outputs, they were much poorer, and on slightly dodgy statistical measures like opportunities to see and advertising value equivalence, there was also a poorer score. So people are still using those, even though the latest sort of PR academia says don't use those. People are still using them to an extent. And people had a whole forest of measures that they used to evaluate. But they did express some scepticism themselves about that. I said, well, we use clout, but we know it's nonsense. You know, it was kind of both. Interesting things that did come out on the evaluation side were that people really valued actually the insight they got from social media, and that was actually the most valuable thing they got sometimes, was the insight into their audiences. Almost more than any message out was the insight back, which is a kind of engagement, I suppose, a passive engagement if you're getting feedback in.
But they said they were seeing value out of listening.
Yeah, right over listening. So that was that. The other thing that I did was, once having collected this data, both on the Grunig modes and on the evaluation, Barcelona principles, is I was able to correlate the two, cross-correlate with a second order statistics, and look at the people that were mainly in each of the Gruningian modes versus were they following the Barcelona principles. And it turns out the people that were mainly using it in the one-way modes of communication, either a publicist or public information, were generally worse at adhering to the Barcelona principles. The people that were mainly towards the two-way symmetric communication, the best communication, showed a stronger correlation to the Barcelona principles. So what it means is, and that's kind of obvious in a way, because if you don't care what your audience think, then why would you evaluate at all? If you turn it around that way. So the people that did care about the audience thing were the people also that were doing evaluation more seriously. It might also mean that actually what I uncovered there is that there is a maturity model in government departments in which your use of social media becomes more sophisticated and your evaluation does too. And all actually I was measuring was the fact that different departments were at slightly different points on that maturity model, on that curve. So that's possibly another conclusion we could take away from that. So that was it, really. I don't think I had anything else. The other observation I noted with PR was that in Google searches for social media overtook those for public relations at the end of 2009. Sorry, yeah, 2009. So really we all work in social media now, we don't work in public relations, is what I'd say. But anyway, so that is a very much a wide picture of government as a whole, focusing on central government departments. What I wanted to know is, what do you think, and where are you, do you think, on that diagram?